Hello, my name is Laura Wynn, and today I'll be presenting on the topic of progeria. Moving. So on this page, I wanted to give the overall of what my presentation actually is, and on the left side I have a list of what each slide is, and on the right side I have two pictures of two girls that have the disease of progeria. So, progeria is also known as Hutchinson-Gilford progeria syndrome, also known as HGPS. It is an autosomal dominant, and it is also a de novo mutation. It is a genetic condition that is characterized by the rapid signs of aging. Typically, whenever somebody thinks of progeria, they think of somebody looking extremely old from a young age. And you can see that on the right side where I put a picture of a 3-year-old and them about 6 years later at the age of 9. You can see that they tend to look a lot older than they actually are. So on this slide, I wanted to talk about the phenotype and the natural history behind it. So progeria, as I've mentioned before, it is known as the genetic mutation where the person that has it age rapidly at a young age. Some physical characteristics that really stand out when you see them is that they have really prominent eyes, meaning their eyes are pretty distinguished and they're pretty big, and they usually have a thin nose with a beak tip, as you can see in the picture. They also have really thin lips. They have a smaller chin, and they have protruding ears. Another thing you can notice is that they typically have a larger head compared to their face size. And another thing is that typically as they grow older, like age, they tend to develop alopecia, meaning that they would lose their hair. They also have joint abnormalities, and since they have a genetic mutations, they tend to lose a lot of fat under their skin. Although they look like they're aging really fast, this doesn't really affect their intellectual or motor skills. They can still move and think just fine. So the case study I chose was about a 14-year-old girl that was presented with progressive history of coarsening of the skin. When she was born, she didn't really show signs until about 1 year old, and that's when things slowly started changing for her, and she began rapidly aging from 1 year old. Typically, there's no effect on your intellectual. She didn't have any family history of having progeria, and so the way they got to their diagnosis was they looked at their kid and they noticed that she was shorter than the rest of the kids, and she was malnourished, while the eyes were also prominent, and she had a hypoplastic chin, meaning her chin was smaller and her eyes were pretty big. Her skin was also pretty thick at a young age. So they were already skeptical that she had progeria. So they wanted to confirm it by having a skeletal survey, meaning they x-rayed different parts of her body to see if there was any abnormalities or if there was anything different from her compared to other kids, which did show up that she had that her skull had diastasis of the sagittal suture with numerous Roman bones. Her chest showed sloping ribbons like ribs with thinning of both third ribs. And she had a mouthfish vertebrae, and her pelvis showed bilateral coxa valga deformities. Although she was presented and diagnosed with progeria, there's no definitive therapy that's available, and the patient is generally treated conservatively. So there's no cure for it just yet. Some general pathology is that it is extremely rare. Only 1 in 4 million babies worldwide are diagnosed with progeria. Ever since 1886, there have been more than 130 cases reported. It is typically, so the gene that's mutated was the LMNA gene. And the LMNA gene provides instruction for making a protein called lamin A. The altered protein makes the nuclear envelope unstable and progressively damages the nucleus, making cells more likely to die prematurely. So the way they get to the diagnosis is that they establish an proband with characteristic clinical features, along with identification of a heterozygous pathogenic variant in LMNA that results in production of the abnormal lamin A protein, progerin. And a different way that they can also diagnose somebody with progeria is that you can look for the physical characteristics like old aging at a young age, the prominent eyes, the thin nose with the beak tip, and the small chin, and like the bigger head with the smaller face. Those are some ways you can diagnose or find the characteristic of somebody with progeria and push for them to go get checked out. So some ways to manage progeria is that regular diet with frequent small meals is recommended because they're smaller in size, so they couldn't possibly be eating like a huge meal at a time. So smaller meals frequently. They should have a primary tooth extraction because as they tend to get older, their teeth begins to crowd, and if they don't take out their primary tooth, then it starts to get cluttered, and I guess, yeah. So another way to manage it is to use a lot of sunscreen because their skin is very sensitive since they're aging. And some other ways is for physical therapy. Like whenever they get a hip adjustment, then they can easily just use physical therapy to get better. And another one is shoe pads. Shoe pads are useful for them because as they're aging, they're losing a lot of body fat, so it takes a toll on their feet, so it would hurt. And a different thing is that they need to hydrate more, and they should participate in physical activity. So progeria isn't really inherited. It's usually one copy of the altered gene in each cell is sufficient to cause the disorder. Usually the children that are diagnosed with progeria, their parents don't have progeria. It's usually just a mutation. So I also want to bring up Tiffany Wedekind because she is the oldest survivor of progeria. She's currently at the age of 43. She didn't get diagnosed until she was 20, when her brother was about to start a family. Her brother's name is Chad, so he wanted to start a family, but he wanted to get a genetic testing to see if there's anything that could possibly be passed down to his future offsprings. So all of his family members, including Tiffany, sent in their blood test, and it came back that Chad and Tiffany were both positive for progeria, and she didn't realize until she was 20, and he didn't either, and he actually died at the age of 29, I believe, due to, but she didn't realize she had it until her 20 because her hair and teeth began falling out, and that's when she noticed, like, oh, something could possibly be wrong with me, but I don't really know, because she didn't really notice anything besides the fact that she was aging a lot faster than her peers when she was in like elementary. As she reached the age of 43, she started taking a drug named lonafarnib to start slowing down how fast she ages. On this presentation, I presented the phylogenetic tree and our ancestor at the back, and somehow the orca whales / killer whales have the same genes as us, and so does other chimps and bonobos and geladas and olive baboons. Susie Manga Bay, they all have the same gene as us for progeria. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you, and this is my sources, just in case anybody wants to watch it more, learn it more.